Hey everybody, it's Saturday, March 1st. How did that happen? And this is Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the developer of Tinderbox. We've got a really interesting program this week, and we've got quite a crowd. So without further delay, here's Michael Becker.
Hey everybody, excited to have you all here. Welcome. So typically our Tinderbox forum meetup process is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves and or people that haven't been around for a while. So Jacob has been lurking in the forums, but I don't think has really shown up on meetups for a while. Richard Healy's not been around. Jerry, you've been off and on, so it's great to see you all. If you want to chime in and say hi or talk about what you're working on with Tinderbox, that'd be great. Once we've kind of go in and discuss, and just kind of generally meet each other, which is part of the social aspect of this, we then dig into any comments, questions, or themes that people may have that they're trying to accomplish with Tinderbox. And then we jump into themes. So today we've got a really exciting theme. We're going to have Chuck talk about his advanced approach to doing diagramming in Tinderbox. Just as a heads up, the following week, we're going to have Jacob giving a meetup on AI with shortcuts. And then the following week after that, we're going to have Detlef doing his AI evolution with ChatGPT. And then if we're all inclined, by that time, I will have published 2 or 3 new templates for automatically managing multi-dimensional lists, for managing the internal linking within standalone documents, and the production of tables, if not including even some new installers for managing media files in Tinderbox. So that would probably be in about 3 weeks coming from me. So over the next month, so March is going to be a big month of a lot of project-based discussion. So exciting. But before we jump into Chuck, do we want to go around the room? We haven't seen Jorge. Jorge, by the way, how's the book going?
Well, it's been a year, and it's sold as well as you can expect from a book like this, very special, very niche, right? And I'm excited to be here. It's been a while. I was very drawn by the topic here. So
fantastic. Anybody else want to chime in and say hi, or should we just jump right in? Yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
I'll just say, again, Jerry, longtime Tinderbox customer since my friend Rich Siegel of BB Edit fame turned me on to this. I've never taken fully advantage of it, and then my goal for this year is to finally dive in and start using it more. But excited to, hear from you guys.
Perfect. Anyone else? Haven't seen Beck in a long time either. That's awesome. Great to see you. Feel like I'm Nancy from Romper Room. Hi, everybody. And Mary Beth is good. So Mary Beth, you've got a fellow compatriot female joining you today too, which is fun. Yay!
Hey!
We got to get more girls in the group. So guys, start inviting your friends.
Oh my God, 2 females? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. This thing's going the wrong way.
It's a growth. It's a growth of 100%.
Exactly. All right, so great to see everybody. Chuck has been working diligently in the backstage and in the front stage and on the sides on this kind of view of doing diagramming in Tinderbox, and it's something that came up in the forum a few weeks back, and I'm really excited to see what he has to share with us. So, Chuck, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay, I am going to, first of all, can everybody hear me? Is anybody having any problems hearing me? Okay, good. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I'm sharing my whole desktop, and if this makes it too difficult for you to see what I'm doing, please let me know. And if the 2 Marks or Michael could also let me know if there's something showing up in the chat that is a question I should address. Just
so Chuck, on that note, though, by the way, the whole screen is hard to read when you've got that larger monitor. So in Zoom, if you click on Zoom and jump to the advanced tab, the 3rd tab over when you're sharing the screen, you'll on the bottom left, you'll see a button that says share region. And so what you can do is you click that, and then you just share a region of your screen as opposed to the entire monitor, and then you put your window inside that region. So we won't be able to see the file menus, but we'll get a much better zoomed in look on your file, and I think that would be a better approach. And then that way too, you can put different files in and out of the region, versus us having to kind of have the distinct file thing. So you might try that.
Okay, let me start, just because I want to do a bit of an overview. Let me start with the larger screen, and I just want to orient people toward how I'm setting things up. And then what I'll do is I'll maybe select a specific document and put that on the screen by itself and work with that. I'm not going to be doing a lot with the menu picks, so I don't think that'll be much of an issue. I confess that I don't very often do this kind of screen sharing with Zoom, in part because Zoom has been flaky for me on my older computer, but hopefully this will go. Let me try this. Can people see this document now?
Yes, but the words are super small.
Oh, you're still seeing whole. I thought I'd selected just a single.
Yep. I
You
was
don't
seeing
necessarily
one,
need to
we're
read
seeing
the
one
words.
on Tinderbox.
Okay, so you're seeing one screen for household electrical systems
Yes.
up at the top.
Yeah, no, it's
Okay.
fine. It's fine. It
It's
looks
fine.
good.
All right. All right. Give me a moment. All right. I'm going to try this. I have a version of my toolbox up here. This one happens to have two additional diagrams in it that I'm going to be demonstrating today. But let me first start by showing what is in the primary document that was put on my posting. This is the Toolbox 2.0.2. I think that's what I've got posted. And I'm just going to quickly show the usage of this tool with some simple examples. And these are included in that original version without the more elaborate examples that I've got up here. And I'll just close that down. So I'm gonna show usage, and then I'm gonna get into some of the details as to how this got implemented, if that's okay with people. I have here a set of example notes. There are 4 containers, X, Y, and Z, and then a container just that I used for some testing purposes, but also to introduce some concepts. This is a container with duplicate names. So you notice here I've got a note X1, but I've got a note X1 over here in container X. And I've got a note Y1, and there's one in container Y, and so forth. So just to start dealing with some of the oddities you run into when you start bringing into a single diagram notes that come from different places in your document, but also potentially notes that have the same name coming from different places in your document. I have a diagram B that currently has nothing in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate what we do. And let me come over here. I'm going to adjust this. Yes, come on. There we go. All right. Coming back to here. There are several ways I could have done this, but the approach I used is to work extensively with links. The reason I'm using links in the document, and these are what we might call plain or basic links, is I'm linking a note to another note. And the advantage of that is that in the diagram, if I have notes linked to the diagram, then the diagram can get to those notes and vice versa. And secondly, it has the advantage that it traverses all the hierarchy, the tree structure within your document. So the link is directly between 2 notes, no matter where they're located in the overall document. And that's important to what we're trying to do here. So let me show you how I add a note to a diagram. I go to the note, I click on the link tool, and I merely drag it up to the diagram. At this point, I want to select this particular link, diagram to note. And if I do so, then when I create the link, you'll now notice that diagram B has a note in it. This note is what I call a reflection note. It reflects this note, X1. And so if you look here, you'll notice that the reflection note inside the diagram has a link to note X1. And if I click on this, you'll see this is another note, excuse me. You'll see the text that goes with this. Now then, if I come back here and I pick note X2 and I drag it to, I don't know, let's say I accidentally drag it to example notes and I try and do a create link, what you're going to see is a message at the bottom here saying that that connection can't work. So I have some logic that tests for things like trying to connect this diagram link to a non-diagram. It's going to fail with a message to the user because this will only make sense if I connect it to diagram B. And so now when I create the link, I get note X2 added to this. So before I go any further, let me come and take a look at I'm going to switch this. Actually, let me do this. I meant to have this set up beforehand. So the next thing I'm demonstrating is I'm now looking at diagram B in map view, and I see these two notes are in this map view. So if I come back to the outline view, just so we can see where we're positioned, what I've done is I've dragged two links from container X, note X1 and X2, to diagram B. Now we'll note that note X1 has a link to, as an example link, to note Y1 and Z1, as well as note X4. So if I were to look at this section in map view, what you'll see is I've got these three containers. I'll just expand on this one a little bit. With these various notes in them. So this is the typical diagram or map view, not using diagrams. This is just the way that map view has always worked. It's very useful. It has a lot of very interesting capabilities. It is a useful tool for going into your containers, seeing what's there, coming back out of your containers. The visualization of what a container is and what a node is pretty effective. But the problem is that links are very difficult to represent in this format, because if you have links between, let's say, note X1 and note Y1, it's difficult to figure out how you would illustrate that in a situation, or to do it automatically anyway, in a situation where you're crossing these container boundaries. You could show links within a container. So note X1 has a link to note X4. So if I temporarily drag this over, you'll see that's where that note is going to. And if I go back up here, we can't really see that at the map view. And so the principle that we're trying to work on here is we want to do something that Dr. Becker has referred to as flattening maps. And I think that's a reasonably good metaphor for this, because what we want to try and do is we want to try and take a bunch of notes, and instead of having them in this multi-dimensional structure of containers that can be nested to any level of depth, we're going to bring all those notes up to a single flat plane. And that's what this diagram view is doing. So if I come over here and look at the diagram view, I see the two notes that have been dragged in. And right now, anyway, there are no links between them. Well, let's go back and let me flip back to outline view. We can see where we are. And I'm going to, since note X1 has a link, an example link to note Y1, let's bring Y1 into the diagram. By the way, quick aside, the diagram note has a Unicode character, which is the left pointing arrow. And there's another, happens to be another link that is used to go in the other direction, which has a right pointing arrow. Those are just Unicode characters. I did that for a fairly specific reason, but I'm not going to get into all the whys and wherefores of it all at this point. But just be aware that as you're working with these, that's just a single character. All right, so I'm not going to create the link to add Y1. And if we go over and look at the diagram view, we'll notice that Y1 has a link. What has happened here is that I have some logic in this, that when we do that connection, we add a new note to the diagram, there's logic that goes back, it goes on an edict, and on a regular basis, we'll go and find all the links that are between any pair of notes that are both in the diagram. So in this case, this particular link here, even though it looks like it's the same link as we have back at the main diagram, or the main document, it is actually another link. So this is a link that exists on the diagram or in the diagram container, but it reflects the link that exists in the main document. And so if we keep doing this, if I take, let's grab note Z1 and let's put it up in the diagram view, create a link. And let's take note X4 and put it up in the diagram, create a link. Now when I come over here and look at this, I'm starting to see a little bit more richness of structure. I can start playing around with some of these things. I mean, I can do all the things I can do in map view. And this is what makes this appealing, is that map view is fairly powerful. So if I decide that I want this link here to be coming in there, I can do that. If I want to move this over here and I want this link to be going in from there, I can do that. Now, let me go, and by the way, you'll notice some things. You notice the note X1 has basically carried over the color of note X1 in the main document. You'll notice that note Z1 has an accent color, sort of a pinkish accent color. That's carried over from the main document. So one of the things that also happens when we add notes to the diagram is we're copying a set of attributes that relate to appearance. And we copy them from the original note to the reflection note that exists in the diagram. So again, the terminology I use is note Z1 in this case is a reflection of note Z1 in the main document.
So Chuck, a reflection is kind of like a persistent alias. You know, it's a discrete hard note, unlike an alias that would disappear.
Yeah, and I'm kind of avoiding the term alias because
Yeah, of
alias
course.
is a pretty well understood term.
Yeah.
And while it's very tempting to say these are sort of like aliases, that could lead to a lot of misunderstanding.
No,
that's why.
But the point is you're literally copying another note, and then you're using this idea of reflection where you're copying over certain attribute values or text values and things like that so they stay in sync.
Correct. That is absolutely correct. And what's more is I'm going to show you in a little bit that the user has complete control over how much of that reflection takes place. You
Nice.
get to decide how you want things to reflect. So one of the other things I'll point out at this stage is that when the note gets added to the diagram, what I do is I copy the name of the original note and make it the name of the note in the diagram. However, that name is not continually updated. So if I go into the diagram and I take, let's say, note Z1, and I say Z1A, and I come back here, Z1 has not been changed. That its name is still the same. However, if we look at the diagram reflection node, this is what connects note Z1 back to its reflection node. So note Z1 is the reflected note. Its reflection is note Z1A in this case. And this is the link that establishes that. And again, you can look at this and you can see some things. So that in this case, what I see, this is just something I put in for diagnostics and help people get a better understanding for things. But when I create that note the first time, what I actually do is I paste into the text the path name to the reflected note. So the path to the reflected note is simple diagram examples, diagram B, note Z1. So that's how we're doing some of this stuff. And so the concept I want to get to at this stage is when the note gets placed in the diagram, it carries over most of the appearance attributes of the original note. It gets the name of the original note, but that name is not continually updated, nor does anything go back and affect the original note. So one of the principles I'm trying to do is to say, other than adding this link here, I am not in any way modifying the original notes. So everything in the original notes stay the same. If I move a note from one place to another, so if I were to take note Z3 and move it to here, that doesn't change anything. That note is unaffected. That movement will not affect the diagram. The diagram will stay linked to that note no matter where it is in your document. So that's one of the other objectives, is to build a diagram, but not put any constraints on what people are doing with their main document. To just keep working with notes the way you always have, move them around, copy them, things like that. The only caution I would make is be a little bit careful duplicating a note that is currently in a diagram. And I'm working on that. That's one of the things I want to try and improve on. But other than that, you can pretty much play with your notes, do whatever you want to do with your notes, add to them, update them, modify them, move them, make aliases on them, any of those kinds of things, and that will not affect the diagram connection to that note. That note will still be reflected into the diagram as we're setting things up. So let me continue a little bit on forward, unless there are any pressing questions.
By the way, just on that point of duplication, Chuck, I think an interesting idea would be using the note ID in some capacity. So when you duplicate a note, its note ID changes. And so therefore you can investigate the notes and say, if my note ID is different, then
that's pretty much what I'm going to be doing.
Then delete the links. Yeah.
Underneath, everything is done with IDs. The way that we can reference notes independent of position within the document, independent of hierarchy, is via IDs. So everything is done internally with IDs.
Nice.
And in fact, let me start to expose a little bit of the detail here. I'm going to take this particular note Z3 and I want to add it to the diagram as well, just to have one other note to play with. So one of the other things you can do.
Chuck, one other thing, if you don't mind just demonstrating it for me, see if it works, is I notice how you're using the dragging function for like taking Z3 and connecting it to the diagram. I'm assuming it is equally possible to do that with the parking lot feature.
Yep. So if you're trying to go a long way in your document, you drag the link up to the parking stop sign, whatever that is, and then you take it and you drag it into diagram B, and you're going to get the exact same thing. And remember that when you create links, they will start assuming you want to use the same type of link you had previously. So that's why I don't have to keep changing, is because it just stays diagram note until I do a different type of link.
And then, and just if you bear with me, another way of doing that too is if you click on diagram B, and then if you click on the parking lot next to the diagram B name.
Yeah.
No, the parking lot, the green button next to the diagram name. The name of the note.
Oh, okay, over here.
Right,
Yes.
right. Click that.
Yep.
You click that, and then you could type in the name of a note that you'd want to link to.
Yes, that's
Right.
that's
So that's,
another.
I'm just trying to show other people that's kind of two different ways to get to, you know, do what you're trying to do.
Right.
Or three
And I'm
different.
going to come up with, you know, as I'm playing around with this myself, and I have a purpose for doing all this. As I'm playing around with my own diagrams now, I'm starting to see some things that would be nice to have. Things that would make it easier to add a whole bunch of notes to a diagram at once, or to add them to that diagram with, for example, vertical spacing as opposed to horizontal layout. Things of that nature. And one of the things I want to do is, the purpose of sharing this is not only to make this available to other people, but also I'm really kind of hoping that other people will give me ideas of things that they think would make this work better, or that would be improvements. And I can't promise I will do everything, but I'm going to try and work on this to make it a little bit more effective and useful for people as I go along. So feedback is welcome. And certainly we can start with the feedback on the posting I made on the forum. I may create another posting just to try and keep things from getting too long. That would be just for posting updates to the diagram, or to posting suggestions on improvements or refinements, things of that nature, or asking questions of people, you know, would this be useful? So we'll see how this plays out. But I'm hoping that this winds up being something that the community can participate with, and that the process of sharing will lead to a better outcome. All right, so now I've got this diagram. I'm going to flip over and take a look at the diagram.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
Yeah, it's come up in the chat, and I have the same question. Is there a feature that will, if you make a change to the name of the note in the outline that is already linked to the diagram, will that name change eventually propagate to the diagram, or can you force that to propagate to the diagram in some way?
Yes and yes. No, actually, I should say no and yes. Right now, as I demonstrated before, if I change the name of note Z3.
And that was in the diagram, though. This is
in the diagram. I'm changing it in the
is-
diagram.
right. The reverse way is in the outline. So it's the same in both directions, I guess.
Correct. So I changed it in the diagram. If I go back to the outline, that note has not been changed. So the name is connected at creation of the reflection, and then is not updated later. I'll show you in a minute how you can change that if you prefer it to work differently. Okay, coming back to here, note that, observe that note Z3 is green. Well, because the original note happens to be green color, as we can see here in the attributes. So all these appearance characteristics are being carried forward. Let me now take a look at how you can begin to configure your diagram to suit your needs. So let me take a look at the actual diagram container. And let's start by, first of all, we have a child count that tells us how many notes we have in this diagram. The diagram ID is there mostly because I use this for debugging things. But there's something here that you don't have to really worry about. This is really to support the machinery of making all this work. But I build a dictionary. And this dictionary, if I take a look at, let's say, this is a reflected note and its corresponding reflection. So there are a series of entries in this that are just mapping the IDs of a reflected note to its corresponding reflection. This is just so I can keep track of everything. Now, what would happen if I removed note Z3? So I'm just going to delete it. Oops. I'm just going to delete it. It's gone. If I had moved it somewhere else, same thing, it'd be out of the container. Well, what we note is, if I go down here and look at Z3, Z3 has a connection, but this is actually to diagram A. And it does not, see, if you see here, this is diagram A has Z3 in it. So if I look at this diagram, expand it, Z3 is here. It was here, but it's no longer there. What's more is if I look at the container, you may just notice this dictionary is a little bit shorter. It's a little bit shorter because that pairing of a reflected note to its reflection was removed as well. So I've dealt with some of the messier situations of what happens when you add notes and then remove notes. So most of that should work without too much trouble. And I'm sure I will find some more ways to deal with edge cases that might crop up as problems. But if I come back and take a look at what's in the attributes for the diagram, and again, a diagram is just a container, and maybe I should back up here. The diagram has a prototype. So whenever I create a diagram, the way I do that is I create a container, or I want to set up a container that has the diagram prototype. It will automatically get all this extra text so that every time you create a diagram container, you're going to have a quick refresher here on what the terminology is and some basic usage notes. And in particular, notice this item 5 here, the default appearance. This is coming up here and looking at diagram B. That's what this is. Diagram attributes reflection is an attribute that's been added, a user attribute that has a dictionary, or excuse me, a set of all the user and system attributes that you might want to reflect between a reflected note and its corresponding reflection. So what's this useful for? Well, it's useful because it allows you to decide if you wanted to always have the text copied between your note and either always updated from the original reflected note to its reflection. All you'd have to do is just come in here and add semicolon text. At which point, the next time, you know, this is now bolded because it's different from the default. The next time you came in here and added a note, and let me just, I'll say X2, Z2 is not in there currently. This has text from container Z, note Z2. If I add this to the diagram and then look at it, Z2 is here, but its text has now been copied from the original. So that's how you can begin to control what gets reflected. Furthermore,
Chuck, can I pause you right there real quick? Does the reflection go backwards? So if I edit the text of the note in the diagram, does it go back to the original note or not?
no.
Okay, and then
That's by design.
fine. That's fine. So then the one other comment is we can go back to the diagram then.
Sure.
My reaction then for that is if just so people know this, if they right mouse click on the note in the links. So if you go down to the link pane on the right. And right mouse click on that note right there, or not right mouse click, just hover the mouse, it will pop up the text window, and then you can edit, and then you can edit the original note that way.
Correct. As one of the things I want to get at. So one of the reasons I don't normally bother copying the text through, you can, and I just demonstrated how to do that. But one of the reasons is it's so easy to go to the outbound links from the reflection and see the text in the original.
And by the way, we can't see the pop-up box because of the way the screen share.
Oh,
So you'd have to, just so people know,
I'm sorry.
there's a pop-up box popping up that we can't see because of that.
I'm sorry. I got to be careful about that.
Beck
So
Tench
yes, there's
Beck Tench has her hand up.
okay.
Hey Chuck, this is totally on topic. So I'm kind of watching how what carries over and at what point, and I'm just wondering what I'm understanding here is that sort of the display attributes, the content, depending if we add text or not, the name of the note, those things can all the question I have is with the links. Does the edict apply to the links in both directions? It seems like there are some things that do sync. So could you just tell us what the things are that do sync back and forth?
Yeah, and that's what I'm going to be going on further. So
Okay,
what
great.
I just demonstrated is that if I come over here and if I just look at diagram B, and I assume everybody's seeing now that I'm looking at, I'm in the outline view and I'm showing diagram B, and the diagram attributes reflection user attribute now has somewhere in here, it has text. And if I now go and let's see, I believe it was Z2 that I copied. I quickly look here. Yes, so note Z2 picked up the text from container Z, note Z2. If I change this here and go back to Z2 here, it has not been modified. However, if I say, now we've updated text in Z2, and I go, hopefully this is going to work. I go over here, and I may have to do something like click on diagram B to force the edict to run. But now you see that when I select note Z2, the text got updated. So the edict, I'm doing this with edicts just to avoid having this become a performance issue for people. It may be that you could convert this to a rule. However, every time you want to update things, all you have to do is just go over and click on the container, and that will update all the reflections going on. So you'll notice that the HHH that I put in here is gone. This is now text that's been pulled. So it's a one-way copy operation. So if I now go back to diagram B, and I'm just going to do a use inherited value just to return this. So what you're seeing here is that this diagram has, or this diagram attribute reflection is just a set of all the things that we might want to do. So text background color, badge monochrome color, badge size, what the badge is, just all I just perused, and thank you, Mark Anderson, perused ATBRF and found all the things that seem to be related to appearances. And by the way, I'll just, in case anybody wants to look at this, if you go down into my document commons and under packages, you'll find some further documentation. One of the things that's down here under manifest is these are just some useful appearance sets. So here's an example of an appearance set that's been set up to control the name presentation, to allow you to keep the name separate. So I just took a bunch of name related items out of the full appearance set, remove them here so you have something easy to copy into that reflection set that's associated with each diagram. And I'm actually going to do that right now just to show you the purpose of that. So if I come up here to diagram B and I select this and I copy in what I just added there, all I've done is I've removed any of the things that force synchronization, force reflections of the characteristics of a name. So if I go into the diagram and I take note X2, and I bring up, and you're probably not going to see this. I'm going to bring up the inspector, and I suspect people are seeing it or not seeing it.
We
are seeing it. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. And I want to go for the title, and I want to make this centered. I can do that. I decide I want it to be 18-point text. I come over here and I can make it a little larger, so we'll see that. So I can make changes here. If I had not just modified that reflection set, then the next time the edict would run, this would have flipped back to the way it was before. So I'm just demonstrating the control you have here. So you've got a list of all the system and user attributes you want to reflect from your note in the main document to the note that is the reflection in the diagram. And you've got control over that. And you know, there's just tremendous number of things you can do with Tinderbox here. And this is where the power of Tinderbox really comes to the forefront, makes a lot of things very interesting and very easy. And the power of map view gives you an awful lot that you can do as well, bringing up the inspector to change things. So just be aware that the whole intent here is to try and, as much as possible, leverage the capabilities that Tinderbox has. However, as I was working with this, I realized, you know what? Fooling around with this big set of attributes, and I'm going to revert this back to the inherited value just so I don't get messed up. But dealing with this en masse, you know, all these, you know, this very large set of reflections can sometimes be a little bit of a nuisance. So each of the notes that are reflected gets a prototype. Which is, excuse me, if I go in here, look at X1 in the diagram, its prototype is reflection object. And if you look down here, underneath the diagram prototype, I have the prototypes that are used within a diagram. And by the way, I have diagram bequeaths children turned off so that these don't show up when you create a diagram. But this is just a convenient place to make it obvious. These are the prototypes that apply within a diagram. And I have one for adornments, which we'll talk about in a minute. I have one for just unreflected objects, and I have one for reflection objects. So when I've got that prototype for reflection object, I have a new user attribute called diagram reflected locals. If I want this particular note to have to not reflect, for example, not reflect color. When I do that, what I've done is I've created an exclusion list. So out of all the possible things that could be copied, color being one of them, I've now said, no, I really don't want this note reflecting color. And so if hopefully this will work. Yeah, all right. So if I now, so basically I've decoupled them. If I change the color of X1 here and make it something like a pinkish color, and I go over here to note X1, it stays blue. So that's another way that you can begin to control what gets reflected. So if I want to decouple reflecting certain attributes of a particular note in my main document from showing up in the diagram, I can do that by exploiting this, what I call diagram reflection locals. I can say, these are the things I don't want copied over. So it's just another way to control things here. And I'm sure we could come up with some other mechanisms to begin to control this as well. But I just wanted to give you an idea of the fact that you've got some fairly useful tools, I think, for deciding how you want your main document notes to be reflected into the diagram. So let me pause there. Are there any pressing questions I should try and address? Is this making sense? Does anybody feel like I've made this too complicated or too difficult an explanation?
Chuck, I do want to just make sure you're going to get to this. Everything you're saying so far makes a lot of sense. I'm curious about, and I think I see the answer already in reflected link types, but just I'm wondering about the linkages. Thanks.
Yes. Okay, that is the next topic I'm going to get to. So in the diagram, I have a sort of, you could think of this as being the master set for the diagram. So this is the set of all of the link types that I might want to reflect here. And if I decide, no, I really don't want note reflecting here, I can just come in here and take that out. And for all the notes in the diagram, that link type will not show up. So if I take a note X2, let me see, what have I got in this diagram now? I've got note X2. Let's take note X1, and I'm going to give it a new link to Y1. Let me see, X4. That is going to be not diagram note, but in this case, I'm going to make it note. I'm going to create the link. If you look here, you'll see that I've got a note, an outbound link to note X4. If I look in the diagram, however, note X1 has links to X4, but that's an example link. You don't see the note link. If I were to go back to here, and I were to go from note X1, just so you don't believe I got anything up my sleeve, and I were to do this to X2, create link, go into the diagram view, and I'm obviously fooling you because I should have removed that. Let me take a look and see what I might have done
Chuck,
wrong.
just quickly, I take it that the link is there. What you're actually doing is you're changing the visibility of the link based on your selection. Is that correct?
No, actually what I'm doing is I'm not copying it. So the links in the diagram are all copied.
Okay.
And the set of links that are allowed to be copied is what we see here. And so by removing note, I should have removed the ability to copy that, but maybe I'm missing something.
Well, you linked it from within the diagram. Is that why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be exactly why. And this is one of the things that if you start fooling around with this, you'll make this mistake as well. All right, so let me undo that. Thank you, Beck, for catching my silly mistake. Let me go back to X1 here. Let me create a link to note X4, which is note, and a note to Y2, which is note. And now then when I go into my diagram, I should not see any note linkages. That is correct. So just to reiterate, when we look at the diagram container, this set of reflected link types is what you use to control which links. So if you've got some links that you use for some exotic purpose, and say, I don't want those in my diagram, you just don't have them in this list. If you create new link types that you want to include, and if I bring up this and I look at here and I look at my links, you'll see that I've got some links here that are not in that list up there. This is because I'm fooling around with my electrical diagram. So if I were to pick Ethernet as an example, it's not up here. So if I went over and created a link from, let's say, node Z2 to Y1, and it was of type Ethernet, create the link, go to the diagram view, and Y1 doesn't have an Ethernet connection on it. However, if I go back and look at diagram container, modify this to add Ethernet, then I can go back to my diagram, click on this, and Ethernet link is now there. So again, just the power of being able to decide which types of links you want in your diagram. And I think, you'll probably discover the same thing I do, which is I will wind up creating link types that I really mean only to be in my diagrams. They won't make sense in the main document. But there are also links that are very useful in my main document that I might want to diagram as well. So again, I'm trying to make this as flexible as possible and provide some tools. And I hope I've made it approachable. That is, most of the changes you want to make would be with these user attributes, which are pretty well defined in the documentation I provided with this tool set. So are there other questions at this point that I should try and address?
Yes, I'm just trying to make sure I've got my head wrapped around this correctly. So instead of using aliases, which would give you the fidelity with the original note in the outline, by making a separate note that is a reflected note, an independent, you can pick and choose those attributes. You can decouple the attributes and make specific attributes for the diagram, which don't necessarily relate to the outline. Because did you try to use
that's
first?
No, that's exactly the issue. And the problem with aliases is that an alias is not a note. It is merely a pointer to a note. So you can't change you can't make any attributes of that note different. So if I'm in a diagram, my original note might, be a one shape. I might want to look like that. I might want to do other things. The other thing is, when you're working with aliases, now starting to try and bring in things like an adornment would become potentially a little bit more difficult to think through. Not impossible. I mean, this all works, but I'm trying to create a place in which your notes are reflected, but they're under your control from a presentation point of view. So this is all about how do you present a subset of your diagram or of your document, the knowledge you've curated. How do you present a subset of it in a way that is useful to you? That's what I'm trying to accomplish. So let me just, since I brought up adornments, let me point out, here's another wonderful feature with adornments that's worth getting into. An adornment has, if you can see this here, it also has a prototype. It's given the prototype of diagram adornment, not too surprisingly. And I can do things like I could bring a note over onto that. And if I pin the items that are on the adornment, I can move the adornment around and the notes go with it. If I say I want note X2 on there as well, I can move all these things around. That's really useful. A lot of ways you can do things with this. I can come in here and into the adornment. If I bring up the inspector, I can now come in and I can change color, the background color. I could make it, I don't know, I can make it bright blue. You do all the things you can do with adornments. You can even, play with the little grid and you can lock an adornment so it won't move. You can associate a badge with it, or you can decide that you don't want a badge at all, get rid of it. So another very useful tool while diagramming. You can put titles on them, or you can decide, yeah, heck, I don't want a title on this thing. I just want a square, a rectangle. Very powerful, very useful in diagramming. Now, one of the problems with adornments is you can't draw links to them. But by being able to place notes on an adornment, the links between the notes become very useful. And I'll expand on this in a minute.
So Chuck,
the other thing is,
Chuck, can I interrupt on that real quick so we don't lose the train of thought? You can create a note and then basically make it transparent. And you can put that note at the edge of the adornment and then make that note transparent. So it does, so you're linking to the transparent note. And so therefore you're at least visually getting the idea that it is linking to the adornment.
Right. But again, you'd want to, there's an example of where you'd want to make sure that you turn off the copying of that feature in the set that says, which attributes to copy. Otherwise, that note will keep coming back as being not transparent. So yeah, there's a lot you can, there are a lot of tricks.
Can I not add a note into the diagram that's not being linked?
You're right on top of where I'm going next.
Got it. Okay,
which is I can also just create a note. New unreflected note. This note exists only in the diagram. You can do whatever you want to with it. I can create a link. And I'll leave it as an Ethernet link. That link is there. Note X2 in the diagram has this link. But in your original, no, there is no such, let me get this out of the way. There is no such inbound link for that unreflected note to the X2 in your main document. So this link, this unreflected note, all exists only within the diagram. So now you're free to add any other commentaries or notes, or I could come in here and I could change the shape to be something like, oh, I don't know, hex. What did I do? Pick diagram, diamond when I meant hex. I don't know why it's showing up as a diamond, but I tried to select hex, the hexagonal. But whatever, you can change the shape. You can play around. You're basically, this is a note totally under your control. And it does not exist in your main document. It exists only in the diagram. And there are a lot of ways you can use that feature. Notice it has the prototype of diagram object. So if you want to have some general control over how these unreflected notes look and behave inside of your particular diagram, you can change that prototype assignment, or you can modify the prototype to have characteristics that you happen to want in your style of diagramming. All right, I think I've covered most of the features I wanted to touch on in terms of how to use it. Now I can get into maybe some more advanced examples to show what's possible.
So Chuck, real quick, while we got that screen in place and you've just done that demonstration, can we demonstrate creating a transparent note to show people how they can link to, illustrate the linking to an adornment?
Sure.
Right. So if you were to copy a note, or just
well,
create
how
just
you
create
want me? Yeah, create a new note.
right? Give it give it a name X for now. Okay.
Yep.
And then if you click the inspector.
Yep.
Turn on the inspector and then go to into color right there.
Yep.
Make it transparent.
Yep.
Right. So it disappears. And then you can, and then if you go to the next one over, you can make the name transparent too. But for now, let's leave it as X so people can see it. So if you drag it over to the edge of the adornment, and then draw a link to it.
Yep.
From some other note.
Yes.
So you get that visual of it's connected to the adornment.
Yes. And just so that people don't miss this, if I force the edict update. Oh, I know why, because color was. I would expect that color is one of the things I'm copying here. Let me just make sure. Maybe I accidentally removed that. Oh, I know. It's because this is an unreflected note. I was thinking, if it was a reflected note, then, and let me maybe demonstrate this. If I took note Z2 and I made it transparent, now it's transparent. But in a moment, when the edict runs, it won't be.
Right.
So just people are aware of that.
And the one other thing that, go ahead.
And by the way, you notice that if you have an invisible, the badge will still show. So sometimes that's a handy way of just, when you're working with these things and you've got invisible notes, finding an invisible note on your map might be difficult at times. When you're just getting things set up, you might put a badge on it because that's easier to find these things.
Make a show invisibles stamp. How many?
Yes.
How many levels of container? So it looks like we just have two. We have an adornment and we have a
No, we have
diagram.
one. Yes, we have a diagram and what's in it. So there's one level of container, which is just the diagram. And the whole idea is there's nothing below this. It's not
So
turtles all the way down.
you can't get graphically very sophisticated in terms of regions containing notes with regions containing notes.
Well, you can, Dave. You would use multiple adornments.
Right.
So adornments can lay on top of each other.
Right. Adornments are the way to achieve most of what you want to do in terms of trying to orient things. And because an adornment can pin the things that are on it, it moves as though it's its own object. And, all the notes that are associated with it. And I'll show that a little bit more detail in a minute.
So nested adornments in that context would be, or not nested, but layered adornments would be a really great way.
Layered adornments. So you get the same kind of layering you might get in other diagramming tools you might be familiar with, the way PowerPoint would do it.
Well, I'm thinking of that agricultural diagram that I played with. But yeah, I think as I recall, I did play with more than one adornment. But.
Right.
And Chuck, presumably, although you can't necessarily show it in the diagram, if you needed essentially to have some sort of nesting, you could always make another diagram.
Yes.
Because I think one of the key things here is that a thing that often comes up said, well, I want all the flexibility of a map, but except when I don't want it, which sounds really simple. But what Chuck's just proving is that this is one of the ways to resolve this. So the diagram, as you shift from an exploratory mode to an explanatory mode, you don't want to be surprised by things moving or changing because you did something with them. And so, actually having the diagrams is remarkably powerful here. And if you need more diagrams, you can have more diagrams.
Right. You can have as many diagrams as you want, and then the same notes can be in multiple diagrams. I've actually illustrated that in a couple of cases. Some of the notes that are in this example are in both diagram A and diagram B.
So Chuck, can we try one more thing too while you're at it?
Sure.
So do you have a capacity to take a quick screenshot? Do you have a screenshot tool?
Yes. What do you want me to do?
So I want you to just draw a screenshot of just the diagram itself, not the whole screen. because where I would find myself really loving doing this is I've now got a screenshot of my diagram. So if you can then go somewhere else in your document and create a new note and paste that image that you just created into that note.
Okay. I'll go into container Z and I will add a new note.
And call it like fig hyphen and give it a name, diagram, whatever. Okay, paste that, right?
Okay.
Now, yeah, so paste the image the screenshot image you just did into the text of the note.
All right.
Now, I tend to not do this because I personally like my images outside of the file, but this is a really killer example for this.
Are people seeing the screenshot on your
We're not.
screen? Okay, I didn't think so.
Okay, so
now you should.
Now we've got the diagram in text. So let's go to like container Z real quick for me. Or so copy the name of that figure diagram B.
What do you want me to get?
Just copy the
Just
name
the
of the
name?
note. Yeah, just copy the name of the note. So it's in your
Okay.
clipboard, right? So then if you go to like container Z
Mm-hmm.
and in text type caret include
Where do you want me to type in?
in the text of container Z.
Okay.
Type caret include. And then you'll probably have to turn smart quotes off if you don't have them off. But you'd say
Yeah.
parentheses quote.
Parentheses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Quote, paste the name of the note. And we'll have to turn smart quotes off.
I've already dealt with that.
Yeah. Parentheses quote. And then put comma t render, lowercase t, the word render. No. After the quote.
Oh.
Quote.
Render.
Yeah, quote t render. Looks like smart quotes is still on.
Yeah, let me hold on a second here.
Just throw it into display attributes and then check it.
Yeah, I know. I know almost always just use a Command Z to get around that, but because of what we're doing here.
I actually figured out yesterday that I can put a hotkey on the smart quotes.
Yeah.
So I just hit Control Command S now and it turns them on and off.
Render.
Yeah, T render. Just or like so for
T render.
Yeah, and the capital R. Or it doesn't matter. Okay, now go down into your templates. Once you add, now go down into your templates real quick and create a template named T render. Spelled the same. And in the text of T render, just put caret text caret and nothing else. No, not in between the hat. I mean the hat, not the caret, I guess.
Oh, okay. You want here instead of
just basically remove all of that.
Move everything here. I'm just trying to figure.
Everything. Remove everything.
I'm not sure exactly what you're doing, so
I know. Just so remove everything.
Okay.
And
what do you want me to type?
Now hit like what is it? Command Shift 6 to get the little caret.
Yeah.
Text caret. Okay. So basically you've now created a template that will only render text. Now if you go back and look and preview the container 7 note.
Container Z
or whatever the note is, where we put container Z, I guess.
Yes.
No, go to container Z. Okay, so if you preview that note now, you've now got your diagram in your report. So this is a way to like use your use what you've just done to be able to then copy and paste that diagram into the report.
Yep. I mean, that's again, coming back to the principle I'm trying to adhere to, which is use all the features I can of Tinderbox to, allow us to use this diagramming convention within the context of everything that makes Tinderbox useful.
Yeah.
All right. And by
And
the
then
way, something
on that note,
I
what you could do, by the way, is where that figure B diagram that we created, you could add
Yeah.
other attributes to that, to like version number, date I copied it. So that way, at some point, if you
right.
made revisions, you'd know to update your diagram, that kind of thing.
Right. You've done so much to add to our repertoire of what can be done with publishing and creating dynamic documents and everything. So, yes, absolutely. There's just so many things here. And I just want this to be a facility that can be integrated into the other things that people are doing. That's all.
No, it's great.
All right. So let's see. Let me make a couple of quick comments about the way I structure this toolbox document that I keep using. One of the things that I just want to point out to people, first of all, if you go to the document commons, there is some documentation that talks about how this gets used and so forth. One of the things that I have in here is I have a commons template, commons templates. And if you look at the note that I post, or the forum posting I made for user attribute management, I go into more explanation of how all this works. But one of the things that I set up is you can copy this, which is merely a subset of the larger document commons here. You can copy this into another document, and you bring in some tools and some other capabilities which I use associated with building these diagramming techniques. In particular, this folder here, which is, in a sense, another way of reflecting information in Tinderbox. So what these notes are is they are basically all the details, all the information necessary to create a user attribute, but also reflect what the current user attributes are. So this is just a facility that is available that you can use to copy between notes. And I don't want to get into a lot of details here, but the posting that I have up on the forum does explain this. And I just wanted to mention that, I not so much yet today with the diagramming tools, but in the very near future, I'm going to start starting to take advantage of some of the features I'm building into this document commons. And so that nobody gets surprised, the document commons is something that if I were to add a new note after it.
Hey, Chuck, I think it would be really helpful too, while you're doing that, can you explain, and I know it sounds terribly obvious, but how you switched the folder names from into separators?
Okay, yeah.
Because that put me that caught me off guard, like for 10 seconds until I realized what you did. But it's kind of cool. I like it.
All right. So just as a comment here, I created this note here after document commons. And you notice the next thing that happened is document commons wound up being the last note in the whole document. That's on purpose. There's a rule there that will make document commons always the last document. And I do that because there's a sneaky way that you can always access this. So if I change the name, or if you decide to change the name of it yourself to something else, my document commons or anything like that, other code can still get at the things that are in here, the common things that are in here, without having to know where it is or having path names or any of the other complications. So it's just, I'm pointing that out because it's a piece of infrastructure I'm going to be using, and not unlike some of the things that Dr. Becker is doing with his porting of materials. And if you ever want to see what the current link types, you want a place to easily capture all the link types, under global settings, I have a document, which is nothing more than an extraction of the document features from using Tinderbox code. And one of the things you can get is you can get a list of all the link types. So if you wanted to, find out, electrical circuits and Ethernet and things like that, you just wanted to quickly grab some of these things, this is one of the places you can come to grab that. You also have all the user attributes listed here as a set. So you can come in and grab things like that. And your user attributes, if you add in user attributes, they will automatically appear in this document attributes, where you can then take them and copy them to other documents that are in the same manner. The other thing I wanted to point out is I have something which is a bit aspirational, but I'm creating I have a folder or a container under the document commons that is for packages. And right now I'm putting all the documentation for a package in a container associated with it. So under packages, I have a diagram views container, and here's a quick README. And then there's, a lot of the documentation you've already seen on the posting. Things like system attributes. This is a listing of all the things that I pulled out of, again, ATBRef is really useful for stuff like this. Thank you, Mark. I have a manifest of all the things that are associated with this package. So you can see what are all the stamps and functions and prototypes that are used in here. What are all the user attributes? All of this just here is documentation, pure text. I have my to-do items of things that I need to fix or do that are in here as well. But I just wanted people to be aware of this. And I will keep updating this and adding to it as I work on this. That's why I wanted to point it out to people. If you find things in here that you think are poorly explained, let me know and I will try and make it better. All right. Oh, and let me just close that out to make it a little bit easier. So you asked about how do I make something like prototypes a separator? Well, I go to Old Document Inspector, and where I would normally set a prototype or a template, note that there's also this checkbox for a separator. So now then prototypes looks the way you're used to, but when you make it a separator, it makes it kind of obvious. This is not really part of your main document. This is something I call it infrastructure. It's the stuff you have in your document, make the rest of the document work right. And generally, you don't need to see this stuff. And in particular, if you were to go to the map view for your whole document, once you make these things separators, they don't show up. So it's just a little bit less noise when you go to the map view. You're not going to see things like templates or prototypes or hints showing up in map view. That's just a nice feature of the way this works. And I just find it kind of handy because it makes it easier to hide stuff I don't need. The other thing I just point out here, and this is where I am using some agents, I have things that I call collection agents because I might have diagrams scattered all over my document. But it would also be kind of handy to just have a single place I can go to and see all my diagrams. So I have a diagrams agent is what I was trying to say. A diagrams agent that just collects all the notes in the document that have the prototype diagram associated with them. So it's just a quick way to get to different things. And I do the same thing with logbooks, which I make a lot of use with for debugging. And let me just make a quick comment here. If you do happen to go in and start looking at any of my code, I'll pick a function, for example. Here's how no, I'm in preview. I don't want to be in preview. Here's the code that does all the copying of attributes from a reflected note to the reflection note. So, here's how I go through that process. And just so you're not surprised, in here, I have in anything that I have to do a lot of debugging on, I will create a variant Boolean debug. And if I don't want to see debugging, I set it to false. But if I have a problem with this code, if I start updating it and suddenly things don't work right, I can turn that on and make it true, at which point I can now go I will get logbooks produced, and I will, all these statements you see that say if debug, log rec, will take the information that I'm putting into that log record, and it will wind up in files that are here in the document commons, of course, and they will show up under this logbooks set here, or they will show up here in the reflection, in this collection here. So this is just things you can do just to understand that if you want to play around with my code, you may want to turn on the debugging facility because it will help you understand what that code is doing. But if you're not playing around with the code, don't worry about it. All right. Now let me go over and I will talk about a couple of other things.
Chuck, there's a hand up, if I may. So Andres, I think,
Yes.
has a question.
Please.
Well, first of all, Chuck, many thanks for putting so much work into it and sharing it and presenting it. It's absolutely great, and I already have a number of ideas where I can use it. Just at some point, can you make sure that you demonstrate both for us who are not as knowledgeable and those who watch the video later, how you actually, what steps do we have to do to install the library, and how do we do that? How do we make it sort of work for us? Thank you.
Well, okay, so there is a the best way to deal with that, because it's a more involved process than I would like. But if we go into the document commons, into packages, into diagram views, there is a fairly extensive document that describes what you have to do to put this into your document. The other approach you can use is you can just take the toolbox document that I provide, and if you just want to start playing around with diagrams, just take that and start working with it. Add your own diagrams, add your own notes, copy notes from other documents you have into it, whatever you want to do. But if you want to actually move this diagramming capability into a document you already have that you've maybe invested a lot of time into, this is the fairly terse but hopefully sufficient description of what you have to do to get this into your document. Now, I want to make this easier, and fortunately, several of us have been throwing ideas around on how to make some of this stuff easier. I'm going to try and set this up so that it'll be a little bit more straightforward to add diagramming capability to one of your documents. There are a few little glitches, kinks that need to be worked out to make that work as well as I would like to. In the short term, here's a way to do it. If you have questions, I've included my email address in my posting. You can even call my phone number if you want to. And feel free to hit me with questions on how to make this work. So this is where I've got that documented. And as I said, here's a tutorial. It's not perfect, but it will provide you a lot of detail. And should anybody care, on the backstage, I originally created some planning notes, some notes that were just sort of concept. What would I like to do? How would I go about doing it? So before I ever put any of this into code, I described in considerable depth what I'd like to achieve. So if anybody's interested in anything like that, you can follow up with me. Let me, hopefully that addressed your question for the time being. Let me go back and start talking about some ways to use this more extensively. So I've been working on a project in my own house to go all electric. And it turns out to be a fairly challenging project. There are a lot of details, there are a lot of issues. And I'm dealing with, I'm on the bleeding edge of some stuff. So I've been documenting what I've been doing. And one of the things that's just necessary to keep track of is, all the connections that exist network connections, power connections, thermostat connections, etc., that exist when you start reworking the electrical plant in your house. So I've been building up a set of notes to deal with all of this. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be neat if I could create a diagram that would show me these connections? So in all of these links here, I have notes that if I go to my outline view and I go up here, and let me close this up and open this up, you can see that, for example, if I have thermostats, you'll see that the thermostats, I'm gonna bring up, that you'll see that thermostats have links between themselves and notes that are in other containers. So when I look at this view here, I don't see those links. But when I look at the diagram I built for this, somehow I got myself lost here. That's not the one I wanted, sorry. All right. Apologies for futzing around there. So here's a diagram that shows the complexity that one gets into when you start doing a project like this. So these blue lines are showing power connection. All of those are reflections of links that exactly exist in my main document. And they exist for a purpose because I'm trying to keep track of this. I'm trying to document some of these things. There are some technical issues I'm working. There's information about the equipment that I'm trying to keep track of. And being able to follow my links to trace documentation or trace, well, how did that actually get hooked up, is useful. And it's not just for power connections, it's also for network connections. So I've got Wi-Fi connections, I've got Ethernet connections going to all these things. And one of the objectives I had with doing this diagram is I created a fairly extensive case study, which I've shared with the vendors that are, I've used their equipment in my house. And the purpose for doing that case study was to show them, you know what, guys, this is all very nice and wonderful, but all the connections that exist between this equipment wind up being separate silos. So there is a silo for one of my heat pumps, which involves an app that I can run on let's say a mobile device, a service in the cloud, and the actual equipment, which only talks to the service in cloud and does not talk to my local environment. So I can't get at it except going through the cloud. So it's a silo. So I wanted to be able to explain what all these silos are. And there are actually 7 different silos in this diagram. And all that I wound up documenting and showing people how this all interrelates in a way that is not constructive or not helpful to actual users trying to build and deploy and operate this stuff. So that's one purpose. And you can see that, I can come in here and I can click on something like this, and I can see details if I wanted to see further information. Having these lines start animating makes it a little bit easier to follow a bunch of things. But I want to see all the Wi-Fi connections, all that's there. If I want to see what the thermostat is connected to, I can do that. I did not mean to do that. And I also demonstrate the use of adornments. So this orange shaded adornment here can be moved around. I can move it. And everything in there shows up. It stays with it. So this, again, is a powerful capability. Adornments are very helpful in this regard. The electrical panel, this is an adornment that collects all of these circuit breakers This is an adornment for an automatic transfer switch that connects all of the lugs on the transfer switch. Here's a sophisticated power cell inverter, which actually allows me to run off battery capability, battery capacity. It's got lugs that connect power, things of that nature. So this is what you can do with it. You can take something that shows internet connections coming in and power connections and thermostat connections. You can put it all on a diagram, however you want, and have it still be reflecting what's actually in your main document, all the information you've accumulated about things. So I'm now starting another project. Let me scale this down a little bit. Can people see this? All right.
Yeah.
So I have a new toy. I have an energy usage monitor. Because I've got all those silos of stuff, I have a problem, trying to actually get information that is in a usable format. Everybody's got their information in their own way of doing things. Even if I can download it, it's different for every device. They use different timing. They use different ways of collecting information. So it's a nightmare to try and integrate all of this. So the solution is get an energy usage monitor and start tying it into all of the electrical taps and having this connect into a, in my case, a Home Assistant hub. And now that I get all the information in a consistent manner and I can monitor power usage, voltage, I can monitor temperature. I have a weather station at my house. I can monitor directly without having to go out to the cloud. I can monitor the actual temperature outside, not the temperature in my area, but the actual temperature here. And since I'm in a valley, that does vary from the regional temperature. All this information is coming into one place, and I'm going to be documenting that. But in the short term, I had to figure out, so which circuit breakers am I going to connect all of these, what are called current transformers, to, so that the current transformer is just what you use to monitor power through a wire. So I'm setting all that up, and I'm just, here's an adornment. Here is a my reflection of the actual piece of equipment, the controller that controls all this. Here are all the taps for the current transformers, and the current transformers are actually a wire coming from this tap that goes down here and couples or hooks around the actual wire coming out of the circuit breaker. That's what this does. And then it can monitor the voltage, the power, the current for that. And I can come in here and I can take this container and I can bring up my stamp and I can say, hey, let's make that a lozenge shape. You notice it changed right back. Well, how do I fix that? Well, I come over here and I go to my document locals and I say shape, semicolon, return. I come back over here. And now then if I select this and change the shape to lozenge, it'll stay lozenge. So again, this is real world. This is actually something I'm wearing up as my project. I'll go back to it later this afternoon, and I'll be drawing more connections, not necessarily in the diagram, but in my main document, where I have the household electrical plant. This is a container, and in here I have the note for the utility feed. I have a note for the main electrical panel. So I've got all of my circuit breakers broken out here, and all of those are reflected in that diagram. So if I look here, I can see they're in that energy monitoring diagram. Here is that energy usage monitor, and there are all the current transformers, as well as the power connections that it needs to be able to actually measure voltage and current, as well as power itself. So all of that is there. This is in my main document. This is where I want to add text, where I want to add illustrations, where I want to create links between things, where I want to explain what's going on, where I want to say, I've got a task that needs to complete this particular change on this particular device. All that kind of stuff that I do in my Tinderbox world, I do it the same way I've always done, but I have on the side the ability to create this diagram, which shows what all this looks like. That is, to me, a pretty useful capability. I hope some of you find it useful, and I welcome feedback. I see you have your hand up, Dave. As somebody who has gone down this path as well, somebody who's played around a lot with his home electrical system, I hope you have comments.
Well, the electrical part, you're blowing my mind, and I'll be in touch with you offline for that. But watching your other diagram view, which showed the power, Ethernet, and Wi-Fi links, it struck me that, this is in the chat a little bit, that perhaps you could create notes that within that diagram view that on visit run some action code that would either show or hide particular connections. Like you were clicking on the one thing to show the animation, but like you could turn off everything but Wi-Fi or turn off everything but power. That there might be some button actions essentially button actions we could do with notes and action code and approach something like what might have been with HyperCard.
Yes, absolutely. It was more than I could get into in today's. I'm already at the limit, well beyond the limit. And I think I just lost my microphone. Hold on. Hopefully you can hear me.
Loud and
That
clear.
was awesome.
Okay, so yes, I agree with you, Dave. That's a good observation. It just went beyond what I could explain in the hour and a half or so that I've taken up here of everybody's precious time. So, again, I think this is something that if people are interested, I encourage you to communicate with me, share with me your thoughts, suggestions. I have finite time. I've got a very busy project. I got to keep working all this stuff you see in these diagrams here. But it's something that I want to do and extend further. So I welcome suggestions. I welcome feedback. And if anybody else has ideas they'd like to help contribute to this, let's see if we can work together. So that's where I am at this point. And I've taken up too much of your time, probably.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Fabulous. Jacob, before we end, do you want to give us a quick rundown on what you'll be sharing with us next week?
I think it's in 2 weeks. By the way, hi everybody.
2 weeks. I'm sorry.
I think it's in 2 weeks, on the 15th.
Maybe Detlef.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Detlef is next week. Sorry, you're in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I can give you a quick rundown though. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I've been playing actually quite a bit with using ChatGPT to do a variety of like summarization and data analysis, even qualitative data analysis tasks. And I have a variety of notes. I kind of use Tinderbox and have been using Tinderbox as a database of sorts for a variety of different data items. So yeah, I'm going to give kind of a demo of how to make that work. And I kind of call it a cheap solution, in that it doesn't require a whole lot of programming, and you can use tools that we're all familiar with, like Tinderbox and shortcuts, to do that, and to integrate with ChatGPT. So that's going to be the bulk of it. I got a local LLM I'm tinkering with too. If we have time, I might demo that. It's actually pretty powerful when connected to a vector database, which is generated from Tinderbox document. So I can get into that. It's a little more advanced, but
yeah, and how to
it's all fun stuff.
How to train your local LLM would really be
that's
cool
right.
to delve into that. So
yeah.
And then that kind of keys off of what we talked about last week with the kin guys, and the whole idea of training your personal AI to represent you to the market and all of that. or you know, for your own psychological self. And then so Detlef is next week. Sorry, I keep getting confused juggling all these different things. So Detlef will be next week, and he's going to be talking about his integrations with ChatGPT as well. So we'll have a couple weeks of AI, which will be exciting. Awesome. All right, everybody. Have a glorious week. Bye-bye.